So now we're talking about the budget. How much do we spend? How large is it? And I want you to play along and do some guessing. So the first question, just guess. Nobody can see how wrong it is. So how big do you think the U.S. budget is in numbers? Is it billions? Is it trillions? Is it quadrillions? What do you think the number is? And then I want you to guess the percentages of where the money comes from. Understand that with a capitalist economy, we do not allow the government to own the means of production, the natural resources. Other countries, the national government gets their money from oil or the ore that is in the ground. We don't. So we get our money from taxes. Individual income taxes that are paid based on the tax code, corporate income taxes, social insurance taxes, which we're actually going to call payroll taxes, and then everything else. Excise taxes, estate taxes, gift taxes, custom duties. When you buy an airline ticket, you pay a airline tax. So all of that is other. Social insurance tax, just to go over what that is. It's a payroll tax. If you are employed, you pay it. Social Security and Medicare is funded directly from this payroll tax. Your employer pays half and you pay half. So 14% of your wages up to $106,800. And so that's an outdated number from when that was a heck of a lot of money. And we'll revisit whether or not that needs to be raised. But currently, the law says that you pay payroll taxes to Social Security and Medicare on 14% of your wages up to this amount. If you're self-employed, you are writing a check quarterly of 14% of your wages. If you get a paycheck from someone else, your employer pays half of that and you pay half of that, and it comes out of every check. So clearly, if we're only charging that to incomes of $106,800, somebody, making $1 million a year is paying that on their first month and then never again. So when we talk about raising taxes for Social Security and Medicare, this is where we're going to start on whether or not that number should be raised. But that's payroll tax. So there's a lot of people, maybe yourself included, but certainly other students who are employed and paying payroll taxes who don't make enough money to pay income taxes. There's an exemption that you get where you don't have to pay, and then some people actually have an earned income tax credit that they get back from the government because they make so little in a year. So our income taxes are progressive, which means that the percentage that you pay goes up based on your income. So for the first, $9,525, you pay 10% of that. And then the next group of money, your money is grouped, you pay 12%. So if you make $1 million or more, you're only paying this 37% on the dollars that are above $500,001. So your money is taxed at different rates. It's called a progressive income tax. The more you make, the more you pay. And then there are exemptions and there are tax loopholes, and this doesn't come close to what most people pay. So somebody like Warren Buffett sort of infamously said, I only pay 13% on my millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars of income each year, where somebody who works for him and has significantly less loopholes and tax shelters would pay more because of that. Now, we're talking about a 37% as the top tax rate. That is historically low. We sometimes talk about these things as if, the numbers have always been this high. But if you look in the 1940s, all the way until the 1960s. The top tax rate was in the 90s. And so the taxes that were charged during those years really sort of disincentivized large salaries, because at some point, the top earners would have to pay 91% taxes on the marginal most money that they were making. So, somebody who was making, in the 1940s, the wages were incredibly low, but the equivalent of $1 million today would be paying, 91% on that top amount. So it disincentivized large salaries. And when you look at income inequality, you saw that there was much less difference between top earners and bottom earners. When taxes are low, that incentivizes high salaries, incentivizes that. And so really for the last few decades, we've just been going back and forth between 38% and 32% and 35%, and going back and forth between that. We haven't seen these high taxes that disincentivize that. And so it has led, as it did in the 1920s, to great income inequality, that the poor are poorer and the rich are richer, and we see that big chasm in between. So the next thing is, where do we spend the money? And the money gets spent on these 9 general areas: defense, education, interest on the debt, foreign aid, which we already talked about in a past lecture about people, grossly overestimating the percentage of foreign aid. They believe, 37% is spent of the whole budget, and that's larger than we spend on anything. And they think we spend it on foreign aid, when in fact we spend less than 1% on foreign aid. So I've given you one of the answers to the 9 questions of what percent of the overall budget do we spend on these categories? How much do we spend on Social Security? How much do we spend on welfare and income security? Health, which is Medicare and Medicaid, which is healthcare for the elderly over 65, and Medicaid is healthcare for the very poor. VA hospitals, veterans benefits, all of those sorts of things are in healthcare. Environmental protection and conservation, and then other, where just about everything you can think of goes. Homeland Security and agriculture, space and science, and roads and bridges, law enforcement, national parks, energy, all of those sorts of things go into this other category. So I know it's tempting to just skip along, but really, pause this and spend a little time. What percentage do you think we spend on each of these categories? And then I want you to think about, if you didn't know anything about the current budget, if you didn't know what our priorities were, if you look at this in a perfect world, what should the priorities of the United States government be? Because that's really, whether it's a personal budget, a family budget, a national budget, or a state budget, budgets are a reflection of our values. Budgets are a reflection of our priorities, of what we want to spend. If your family spends very little on, travel, and spends most of the money on savings for college education or your house, that's what your priority is. If you live in a small little apartment because you like to travel as much as possible, that's your priority. That's what you spend your money on. Budgets are just that, a reflection of your values and priorities, of what you think is important. So when we look at the national budget, it's no different. What should we, in a perfect world, be spending our money on? Education? Space? Infrastructure? Healthcare for everyone? Education for everyone? What do you think is most important?